Good morning and a very good day to our respected lecturer and to all. Today, our group would like to present a translanguaging activity that is designed specifically for ESL learners in the Malaysian classroom context. The title of our activity is Let's Talk About Our History, Malaysia. To begin with, Malaysia is widely recognized as multilingual and multicultural nation. In our society, people grow up speaking and hearing more than one language. Students may speak Bahasa Melayu at home, use English in schools, communicate in Mandarin or Tamil with family members, and even use local dialects in their communities. These languages are naturally part of students' daily communication and identity. When students enter the classroom, they do not leave this language behind. Instead, they bring all their linguistic knowledge with them. However, in many English language classrooms, a monolingual approach is still commonly practiced. Students are often expected to speak, think, and learn using English only, regardless of their proficiency level. This expectation can be very challenging for ESL learners, especially for those who are still developing basic vocabulary and sentence structures. Many students feel anxious when asked to speak English because they are afraid of making mistakes, being judged by their classmates, or being corrected too often. As a result, they may choose to remain silent even though they understand the topic very well in their first language. Over time, this situation can affect students' confidence, motivation, and participation in the classroom. Therefore, there is a strong need for a teaching approach that recognizes students' linguistics, realities, and supports their learning in a more inclusive and effective way. This is where translanguaging becomes highly relevant in ESL education. Translanguaging is based on the idea of multilingual learners do not separate their languages into fixed systems. Instead, they draw and form a single integrated linguistic repertoire to make meaning, communicate ideas, and understand academic content. In other words, students naturally use all the languages they know to support their thinking and learning. By allowing students to use both English and their mother tongue, translanguaging helps reduce cognitive load. Students are able to focus on understanding ideas rather than struggling with unfamiliar vocabulary. This makes learning more meaningful and less stressful. Rather than viewing the first language as problem or interference, translanguaging treats it as a valuable learning resource. When students are allowed to use their home languages, they feel more confident, respected, and included. This validation of identity plays a very important role in increasing students' motivation and willingness to participate. In the Malaysian context, translanguaging also reflects how students naturally use language in their daily lives. Therefore, using translanguaging in the classroom makes learning more authentic and realistic rather than forcing students into an unnatural English-only environment. Now, the main purpose of this activity is to develop students' English speaking skills while acknowledging and valuing their multilingual backgrounds. Through this activity, students are encouraged to use their home languages during brainstorming, group discussions, and idea development stage. This allows them to express ideas more freely and organize their thoughts more clearly before presenting in English. The activity also aims to create a supportive learning environment where students feel safe to speak and make mistakes. Instead of focusing only on accuracy, the activity emphasizes communication, meaning making, and confidence building. By using familiar topics related to Malaysian history and culture, students are able to connect classroom learning with their personal experiences. When students talk about something they already know, they feel more confident and engaged. This relevance helps increase participation and encourages students to speak more actively in class. Now, ultimately, the goal of this activity is not to replace English with the mother tongue, but to use students' existing linguistic knowledge as a bridge to help them speak English more effectively. The focus language skill for this joint languaging activity is speaking. Now, speaking is one of the most important skills in language because it allows learners to express opinions, share ideas, and interact with others. However, speaking is also one of the most challenging skills for ESL learners, especially in multilingual classrooms. Many Malaysian students struggle with speaking English due to limited vocabulary, uncertainty about grammar, and fear of being judged. Some students worry that their pronunciation is incorrect, while others are afraid of being laughed at by their peers. These emotional factors often prevent students from practicing speaking in class. By focusing on speaking through a translanguaging approach, students are given the opportunity to plan, clarify, and rehearse ideas using their first language before producing spoken English. This reduces anxiety and lowers the affective filter, making students more confident and willing to speak. Gradually, students are encouraged to use more English during oral presentations. Over time, this helps improve fluency, pronunciation, and overall communicative competence in a supportive and low-pressure environment. To address these challenges, our group designed a speaking-based translanguaging activity titled Let's Talk About Our History in bracket Malaysia. Now, this activity is designed for Form 1 students who are still adjusting to secondary school, learning, and developing their English proficiency. Now, at this stage, students often rely heavily on their mother tongue to understand instructions and express ideas. The activity acknowledges students' multilingual backgrounds and encourages them to use their home languages as a foundation for learning instead of forcing students to speak English immediately. This activity allows them to build understanding and confidence first. Now, by focusing on Malaysian history, tradition, and historical figures, the activity becomes culturally familiar and meaningful. Students feel more comfortable discussing topics they already know, which increases their willingness to speak and participate. Now, for the overview of the activity. In this activity, students are first divided into a small group to encourage collaboration and peer support. Now, each group is given a short English text related to Malaysian history, such as traditional practices, important historical events, or well-known historical figures. Students read the text together and are encouraged to annotate, discuss, and clarify meaning using both English and their mother tongue. During the group discussion stage, students freely use translanguaging to exchange ideas, explain concepts, and organize the main points. They may translate difficult words, explain ideas in their first language, or mix languages when necessary. The teacher monitors the discussion and provides guidance without restricting language use. Through this process, students gradually develop confidence in speaking English, improve their fluency, and learn to work collaboratively. That's all from me. Thank you.
Good morning, Doctor. Today I'll be presenting a translanguaging based speaking activity that was designed for an ESL classroom context. This activity focuses on encouraging learners to express their ideas confidently in English while allowing them to strategically use their mother tongue as support. This activity is centered on a worksheet titled Let's Talk About Our History, Malaysian, which uses Malaysian history and culture as the discussion topic. I will explain the learning objective, the description of the worksheet, and the skills targeted through this activity. Next, I will explain the skills targeted through this activity. The primary skill targeted is speaking. Learners are practice expressing opinions, explaining their ideas, and sharing viewpoints in English in a low anxiety environment. Several supporting skills are also developed in this ESL classroom. Firstly, students will listen and enhance during group discussion, as students listen to their peers' ideas and respond appropriately. Second, the activity promotes vocabulary development. Learners identify key words in their first language and then learn or translate them into English, expanding their vocabulary related to history and culture. Thirdly, critical thinking is developed when students analyze historical events, discuss cultural influences, and suggest ways to preserve heritage. So, activity fosters socio-cultural awareness. By discussing Malaysian history and traditions, learners developed a deeper appreciation of their cultural identity while learning English. To conclude this translanguaging-based speaking activity effectively, which supports ESL learners by combining language learning with cultural relevance, the worksheet structure, learning objective, and targeted skills work together to build students' confidence, fluency, and engagement in speaking English. Moving on to the learning objective. By the end of this activity, learners will be able to express their ideas and opinions orally in English. This objective focuses on developing students' speaking ability, especially for learners who may lack confidence or fluency when speaking English. The second objective for learners to use translanguaging strategically to support communication. In this activity, students are allowed to use their first language, their mother tongue, such as Bahasa Melayu, Tamil, or Chinese during brainstorming and discussion stages. This helps to reduce their anxiety and allow learners to focus on meaning before transferring ideas into English. Next, learners will participate actively in group discussions. The group-based nature of the task encourages collaboration, peer support, and meaningful interaction, which are essential for communicative language learning. Finally, the activity aims to build confidence and fluency in speaking English by allowing learners to prepare ideas using familiar languages first, and they feel more confident when presenting their points in English later. So, these learning objectives align well with communicative language teaching and support a learner-centered approach. Moving on to the description of the worksheet. The worksheet is carefully structured to guide students step by step through speaking activity. First, it begins with a topic introduction, which focuses on Malaysian history. Learners are introduced to a discussion question such as how historical events, cultures, traditions shape our community today. And this makes the topic meaningful and relatable to students' real-life experiences. Next, the worksheet includes a brainstorming section where students are allowed to use any language. At this stage, learners can write their ideas freely in their mother tongue or in English. For example, they can spontaneously talk in Malay, Tamil, or even Chinese. This is where translanguaging is strongly encouraged, as it allows students to generate richer ideas without being restricted by language proficiency. After that, students move on to a group discussion, where translanguaging is still allowed. In small groups, learners discuss guiding questions such as which historical events had the most impact on our community, or how do cultural traditions influence our daily lives, and how can we preserve our heritage for future generations. Following the discussions, the worksheet guides students to speak preparation in English. Here, learners select 2 or 3 main points and translate or reformulate their ideas into English. They also focus on key vocabulary and their ideas of useful phrases, and which will help them on a bridge their first language with the targeted language. Finally, the worksheet ends with a reflection on language use. Students reflect on how using their other language help them to speak in English. This reflection increases learners' awareness of their own language learning strategies and reinforces the value of translanguaging. Overall, the worksheets cover students from idea generation to English oral production in a supportive and structured way.
So now we will look into the procedures of the activity. The procedures here are kind of like the description of the activity, but we will discuss in a more detailed manner here. So first, the students, in pre-reading and brainstorming, the students will discuss their ideas in English or in their mother tongue, L1. And then they will move on to the reading session, which is kind of like how we would do in our MUET test, whereby they will be given a short English text on Malaysian history or culture. And then they will move on to the group discussion, whereby the students are going to discuss their main points and ideas by using mixed languages. Then comes the oral preparation, where this is when the students will present their main points in front of the class by using only English. And then it comes to their homework. They will need to do a reflection where they will write on how they use L1 to help them communicate effectively before using English. So it will help them to reflect on themselves. Let's look into the theoretical background of our activity, which is translanguaging. So we have picked a research by Garcia and also Garcia and Wei, where they have stated that languages are not separated systems. So in their research, they argue that people with multilingual tongues have one big and giant complex web of communication that is helpful for them to express their message when speaking. So our activity follows their concept, whereby the students first discuss their own ideas in their own mother tongues, then speak out their main points in English. Thus, it is noted that translanguaging is a unified linguistic repertoire for people who are multilingual to help reinforce the message that is given to the other party. However, though, Translanguaging also helps to reduce the cognitive load placed onto the speaker. Often than not, students will pause and stop for a while to think of an idea when using the targeted language, which in this case here is English. But our activity helps the students to combine their mother tongue and also English to reduce the load for the students when it comes to generating ideas. And since this is a group activity, the students will learn and practice their English through the most knowledgeable others before speaking. Not only that, translanguaging also helps to support mean making, where the students are able to connect new information to what they have already know about, which is Malaysian history and also culture. If a student can explain a historical event in Malay or even Chinese, they will certainly be able to explain it in English after brainstorming their ideas within their respective groups. Third, it also validates the learner's identities, where culture and also language have their values in telling a compelling story. So in simple terms, the student's mother tongue or L1 is not a problem, but a resource tool where it can help students to express their ideas, and it also help to pave the way for students to better understand the English language in ESL classroom by incorporating their mother tongue. Alongside that, the students are able to polish their fluency in English through group work, as they will try and mimic how the more knowledgeable others uses English in their communication style. Into another theoretical background of our activity here, which is affective filter hypothesis. To understand why this matters, we have to look into Stephen Krashen, where he proposed that language acquisition isn't just a cognitive process, but it is an emotional one. Think of the affective filter as an invisible psychological veil, where when it is up or high, it acts like a barrier, blocking the brain from absorbing any input. However, when it is down or low, the learner is open up to the environment, where language acquisition is much more easier. So let's look into how does this translate into our translanguaging activity for speaking. First, it helps the students to lower their anxiety. Often than not, anxiety hinders students' ability to acquire language because they fear that they would embarrass themselves, and this affects the students' perception of themselves, making the participation of the students low, and they would also enter a fight or flight mode where language processing shuts down. However, for our translanguaging activity here, it helps the student to stop worry about themselves and becoming more open to the environment to speak English, where they could incorporate their own mother tongue. Next, it also helps to build confidence for the student. A learner who believes that they can learn the language will take more risk, like high risk and high reward creates a positive feedback loop, which sets the minds of the students to practice more, which leads to more success. And essentially, by incorporating the students' mother tongue, they won't feel any embarrassment when first thinking of any ideas by using their own their L1 or mother tongue, and this helps them to build more confidence, which leads the students to take more risks, which is a good aspect when it comes to speaking another language. So we have looked into how translanguaging is used as a primary strategy to manage this filter. But what does this look in practice? Well, essentially, translanguaging is an act of using a student's entire linguistic repertoire instead of strictly enforcing an English only rule, which often spikes anxiety. But we allow the students to bridge the gap between what they know in their native language and what they are learning now. So it also lowers the barrier, and when a student is allowed to use a native word to explain a complex thought, the panic of being unable to communicate disappears. However, it also helps the students to take more risk, as I have just said it before. If a student knows they won't be punished for mixing languages, they are much more likely to attempt a difficult sentence. They start prioritizing communication over perfection, and this mindset shifts from how can I say this perfectly to how can I make you understand me. And the final point that I would like to highlight is learners should focus on meaning, not fear of mistakes. In a high filter classroom, the students is a monitor, constantly checking their grammar within their head before speaking, and this makes them to speak slow and painful and often non-existent. However, in low filter classroom, the one that utilizes translanguaging, the students becomes the communicator, and our goal as educators isn't to eliminate mistakes immediately, but it's to create a low filter environment where the students feels safe enough to receive comprehensible input. And when fear is gone, the acquisition of language happens naturally.
A very good morning to Dr. Mahendran and all my fellow friends. I'm Zhang Feng Li. My metric number is D2024 1113246. So I'm gonna present how this activity support English learning. So this activity helps students learn English in a way that feels comfortable and realistic, especially for Malaysian secondary school learners. Instead of forcing students to use English all the time, the lesson allows them to use their first language, L1, as a support while slowly building confidence in English. To begin with, the students are allowed to plan and share ideas in their L1 during the pre-reading and brainstorming stage. This is important because many students already understand the topic but struggle to express their ideas in English. When they can think and organize ideas in a familiar language first, they feel less stressed and more prepared. Once their stress, Once their ideas are cleared, it becomes easier for them to express those ideas in English later on. During group discussions, vocabulary problems are handled naturally through peer support. Students help each other by explaining words, translating key terms, or giving examples in L1 when needed. This keeps the discussion going and prevents students from staying silent just because they don't know a word in English. At the same time, they are exposed to new English vocabulary in a meaningful context. By using a familiar topic like Malaysian history that we use for our lesson, it plays a big role in keeping students engaged. Since the content is something that the students already know, students feel more confident sharing their opinions and experiences. This familiarity reduces anxiety and encourages participation, making English feel more useful and relevant to their lives. As the lesson progresses, there is a gradual shift towards using more English. While mixed languages are allowed during discussions, students are encouraged to present the main points in English during the oral presentation stage. This gradual approach helps students transition naturally into English without feeling overwhelmed. Overall, this activity helps improve students' fluency, clarity, and confidence in speaking English. By allowing students to speak all their language resources, they feel safer to speak, make mistakes, and try again. Over time, this builds confidence and helps students see English as a tool for communications, not something to be afraid of. We'll continue with the social linguistic principle embedded in our lesson this one. So this activity reflects important social linguistic principles by recognizing that language is not used in isolations but as part of students' social and cultural lives. In Malaysian classroom, students naturally use more than one language, and this lesson builds on that reality instead of ignoring it. First, the activity treats language as a social and cultural practice. When students discuss ideas using English and their first language, they are not just learning vocabulary or grammar, but using language to share meanings, opinions, and experiences. Discussing Malaysian history allows students to connect language learning with their own culture and identity, making communication more meaningful and purposeful. Second, the activity values students' multilingual identities, allowing the use of L1 in brainstorming and group discussions sends a clear message that students' home language are respected and useful for learning. This helps students feel seen and accepted, especially those who may feel insecure about their English proficiency. Instead of viewing multilingualism as a problem, the lesson treated as a resource. Thirdly, the activity encourages interactions and collaborations. Through group discussion that in our activity sets, students negotiate meaning, help each other understand text, and build ideas together. This interaction reflects how language is usually learned, which is through social use rather than individual memorization. Students learn not only from the teacher, but also from their peers, from their friends, of course. Fourth, the lesson promotes communicative competence over strict accuracy. During discussions, the focus is on whether students can get their message across, not whether every sentence is grammatically perfect. This reduces fear of making mistakes and encourages students to speak more freely in the activity. Accuracy can be addressed later on, but during communication, meaning and participation are prioritized. Finally, the activity reflects real-life language use in Malaysia. In everyday situations, Malaysians often switch between languages depending on context, audience, and purpose. By allowing mixed language use during discussion and encouraging English during presentations, the lesson mirror authentic language practices in Malaysia. This prepares students to use English realistically and confidently beyond the classroom. Now we move on to expected outcome. So through this activity, several uh, positive expected outcomes are shown, especially in terms of students' confidence, participations, and attitude towards language learning. So first, students are expected to speak more confidently in English. Because they are allowed to use their first language during brainstorming and group discussions, students feel less pressure and anxiety when speaking. This supportive environment helps them gain confidence before moving on to English output during oral presentations. Over time, students become more willing to try speak English, even if their sentences are not perfect. Second, the activity encourages students to participate more actively in discussions. When students are not restricted to English only, more learners feel comfortable sharing ideas, asking questions, and responding to their peers. Group discussions using mixed languages allow quieter or weaker students to contribute rather than staying silent. As a result, participation become more and more balanced and inclusive across the class. Third, students are expected to develop positive attitude towards multilingualism by allowing and valuing the use of L1 in English in learning. Students begin to see the languages as strengths rather than weaknesses. They learn that being multilingual is normal and useful, especially in a Malaysian context, of course. This positive mindset helps reduce feelings of shame or fear related to using English and encourages a healthier attitude towards language learning among students. And last but not least, this activity helps students understand that language learning is social and interactive. Through group social and through group discussion, peer support, and oral presentation, students experience language as something used to communicate with others and not just something used to memorize for exams. They learn that improvement happens through the interactions, collaborations, and practice. This understanding supports long-term language development among students and prepare them to use English confidently in real-life situations. That's all from me. Thank you.
Now I will explain the justification of pedagogical choice behind the design of this translanguaging-based speaking activity. Firstly, the decision to focus on speaking skills was made because speaking is often the most challenging aspect of English learning for ESL students, particularly at the lower secondary level. Many learners possess basic vocabulary and grammatical knowledge, yet they are reluctant to speak due to fear of making mistakes or being judged by others. Therefore, this activity prioritizes oral communication in a supportive and low-pressure environment, allowing learners to practice speaking English more confidently and naturally. Secondly, the use of translanguaging as a teaching approach is a deliberate and pedagogically sound choice. In a multilingual context such as Malaysia, learners routinely use more than one language in their daily lives. By allowing students to draw on their first language during brainstorming and group discussions, the activity reduces cognitive overload and supports meaning making. Learners are able to organize their ideas more effectively before expressing them in English, which leads to clearer and more confident spoken output. In addition, translanguaging plays an important role in addressing affective factors in language learning. According to Krashen's affective filter hypothesis, high levels of anxiety can significantly hinder language acquisition. Where learners are restricted to English-only use, anxiety often increases, especially among less proficient speakers. By allowing flexible language use, this activity lowers learners' anxiety, encourages risk-taking, and increases willingness to communicate. As a result, learners focus more on conveying meaning rather than avoiding errors. Another key pedagogical choice is the use of group-based discussion. Group work creates opportunities for peer scaffolding, where learners can support one another through shared knowledge, vocabulary exchange, and clarification of ideas. This collaborative learning environment aligns with socio-cultural theories, which emphasize the language learning is a social process that develops through interaction. Group discussions also help quieter or less confident students feel more comfortable contributing to the task. The selection of Malaysian history as the theme is also strongly justified. Using familiar and culturally relevant content increases learners' engagement and motivation. When students discuss topics that are closely related to their own background and experience, they are more confident and willing to speak. This allows learners to concentrate on how to express their ideas in English rather than struggling with unfamiliar content. At the same time, it validates learners' identities and promotes inclusivity in the ESL classroom. Finally, the inclusion of a reflection component is an important pedagogical decision. Reflection encourages learners to think about how they use both their first language and English during the activity. This process develops metalinguistics, awareness and helps learners become more conscious of their language learning strategies. By reflecting on their language use, learners gain a deeper understanding on how translanguaging supports their speaking development and confidence. In summary, each pedagogical choice in this activity focusing on speaking, incorporating translanguaging, using group work, selecting culturally relevant content, and including reflection was intentionally designed to support learners' communicative development in a meaningful and inclusive way. Now we have come to the last part of this presentation, which is the conclusion part. To conclude this presentation, this translanguaging-based speaking activity demonstrates how English language teaching can be designed to be more inclusive, meaningful, and effective, particularly within a multilingual Malaysian classroom context. This activity highlights the importance of recognizing learners' full linguistic capability. Instead of restricting students to English-only practice, the activity allows learners to strategically draw on their first language to support comprehension, idea generation, and confidence building. This approach reflects the reality of how language is naturally used in Malaysian society and supports more authentic communication. By focusing on speaking skills, the activity directly addresses one of the most common challenges faced by ESL learners, which is low confidence in oral communication. Through group discussions, peer support, and the use of familiar content, learners are provided with a safe environment to practice speaking English without fear of making mistakes. The integration of translanguaging principles also aligns with key linguistic theories. From a sociolinguistic perspective, language is viewed as a social and cultural practice rather than a fixed system. Allowing learners to move flexibly between languages validates their identities and promotes a sense of belonging in the classroom. Additionally, by lowering anxiety levels, translanguaging helps reduce the affective filter, enabling learners to focus on meaning and communication rather than accuracy alone. The choice of Malaysian history as the topic further strengthens the effectiveness of this activity. When learners engage with content that is culturally relevant and familiar, they are more motivated and confident to express their ideas. This meaningful context allows learners to connect prior knowledge with new language input, resulting in more purposeful and engaging communication. Overall, this activity shows that effective English language teaching does not require learners to abandon their first language. Instead, it demonstrates that the first language can be used as a powerful pedagogical resource to support English learning. By combining speaking practice, collaborative learning, and reflective elements, the activity promotes fluency, confidence, and positive attitudes towards multilingualism. In conclusion, this translanguaging-based activity is highly suitable for multilingual ESL classrooms in Malaysia. It supports learners not only in developing their speaking skills, but also in building confidence, identity, and communicative competence in English. This approach contributes to a more learner-centered and socially responsive ESL classroom. That brings us to the end of our presentation. Through this presentation, we aim to highlight the importance of recognizing multilingualism as a valuable resource in English language classrooms, particularly in the Malaysian context. We hope that the ideas shared, especially regarding translanguaging practice, have provided useful insights into how speaking activities can be more designed to be more inclusive, learner-centered, and meaningful. We also hope that this presentation has shown how allowing learners to draw on their first language does not hinder English acquisition, but instead support confidence, participation, and effective communication. By creating a low-anxiety environment and valuing learners' linguistic identities, teachers can encourage more active involvement and foster positive attitudes towards language learning. Once again, we would like to thank our lecturer, Dr. Mahendran, for listening to our presentation. With that, we end our presentation. Thank you very much.